Welcome to a new episode of Just the Radio. This is the first author I've got on the podcast, I believe. Guns and Needles. Today's guest wrote this book. It's been published, so it's a great achievement. Clinton van Berg, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. Do you want to have a brief indication of who you are, a little introduction? Don't have to go into great detail. Maybe just your occupation and a little bit about the book.
Yeah, cool to be here. Thanks for having me. So I head up communications at Supersport. Although I've been a lifelong sports writer, I was at the Sunday Times previously, sports editor. My particular interests were rugby and boxing, athletics as well. And so just over the years, I stumbled across, cases of steroids and sports, supplements, hard luck stories, heroes to zeros, that kind of thing. And for about 15 years, I researched it. And then last year, during the pandemic, I thought, here's a project, I need to get my teeth into it. Hence the book, which chronicles probably the last 25 to 30 years of steroids in South African sport.
So it has been, a long time coming. It wasn't just during lockdown, because I know I only got the book on Monday, so I tried to read as much as I could. But there was one situation where someone in 2021 was caught for steroids, but the person it was a raid or something, but the person that did the raid, you interviewed them or spoke to them at least in 2015.
Yeah, that's quite right. That was a man named Khalid Galant, who heads up the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport. So he's a guy I made contact with 6-7 years ago for the first time. We spoke, we met, and then through the ensuing years, we've had conversations, and then I hooked up with him again last year just to get a sense of the state of play of steroids in South African sport. He's very much the chief anti-doping official in South Africa, an influential man and a very good man.
So all this research that you had done prior to the book, was that with the intention of one day writing a book, or was it just out of interest and, just something you wanted to know more about?
A great question, Jesse. I don't know. You see, I'm essentially a storyteller, and I like to collect stories and interesting things, and I kept a file for many years. I think deep at the back of my mind, I thought there might be something in this, unquestionably. And then the book almost wrote itself because of so many stories, so many interesting characters, and then it fell to me to sort of pull that narrative together, which is something I really enjoyed doing, leaning on my sports writing ability, and then hopefully my ability to sniff out a good story.
And have your whole life, have you been a storyteller, a journalist, someone looking for, something to share?
Well, first and foremost, I've just been a sports junkie. Just absolutely obsessed over it since I was a boy. I've enjoyed that environment. I've enjoyed sort of hanging around, sports teams and following them around the world, fortunate enough to do so. But equally, I have a great love for words, a passion for writing, a passion for reading. So I've been very fortunate being able to combine all three of those.
15% off Cream Supreme orders. You can use the code JustTheRadio and save 15% off Cream Supreme online orders only. Nutricon. You can use the code FITFEB. That's right. That's only for February. You can save 20% off on all Nutricon orders using the code FITFEB. If you are watching this after February, March, April, whatever it may be, look in the description. The new code will be there and you'll be able to still get your 20% off. You say obviously the book theory kind of wrote itself, but was it ever a goal of yours and something that you've now achieved?
Yeah, I did Ryk Neertling's book about 9 years ago, and so another book was long overdue. I wasn't particularly keen to do a biography or something again, but this struck me as a cool project, but also an important project. I think it offers a cautionary tale to athletes, but also equally to mums and dads who might have concerns, and then people like me who are interested in sport and what's going on. But it's not a sport-only book. It's a sport for people who live, people who go to gyms, people who watch tennis, hockey, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'd like to think there's something there for everyone.
We're delving into the book now. It's primarily about substance abuse within athletes, professional athletes, schoolboys, and I can't remember the exact number because I heard it so long ago. And actually, I tried to find the exact stat before this podcast started, but I couldn't. It was from, I believe, a bodyboarding documentary where they asked all the people, are you willing to, die 20 years before your time to achieve your goals, obviously through substance abuse. And I believe it was something like over 50% were like, I'm happy to die 20 and be 20 years younger, die at 60 or whatever to achieve my goals. I'm willing to risk my life.
You're not wrong. In fact, a similar survey was done with Olympic athletes, and they asked about the Olympic gold medal. And, would they compromise their morality and ethics and everything, take juice if it would guarantee them a medal? And by far, the vast majority said they'd do it just for the glory and, obviously the esteem and the status that comes with being an Olympic champion. Quite right.
And it's also in schools, especially, that's where it starts, essentially. Or maybe it even starts at a high level when the schoolboys kind of see it being happened and, their older brothers tell them about it and then they start it. But it's unfortunate. When I was in school, I was naive. I thought, that person can't be doing it. We're only 16, we're only 17. It can't be happening. And then when I matriculated, I found out that my friends were telling me they were doing it and this person was taking this. And then I look back and it just doesn't seem like it was actually a possibility because they weren't outperforming anyone. They weren't doing all of these amazing things. They were just actually putting their body at risk. Yeah, obviously, it's a select few that do outperform, in schoolboy at least. But those people that I've spoken to that were on it, it didn't give them that competitive edge that they were obviously looking for, but it did give them the risk.
You're quite right. In researching the book, I scratched around and stories were falling out all over the place about schools and the experience of schoolboys, etc. But also an interesting development, which I discovered with the book, is that not all boys juice for performance. There's a big percentage who juice for vanity. They want to look good for the girls. So they're not competing. They're not taking part in sport necessarily, but they do want to look buff for the beach. So that's another kind of dynamic that's at play. I know the school that was quoted to me, mentioned to me, it was an Indian school which didn't do particularly well at sport, yet they had this enormous rate of steroid use among the boys, and that's what it was attributed to look good.
Yeah, I mean, the common phrase, and most people watching this are in my generation, where it's, it was DAC for VAC, and everyone would be trying to look as good for VAC, and they just happened to be playing sport as well. Their sole purpose of taking the juice wasn't for performing better, as you said. It's obviously just to look better. And it possibly is more like that now, I think, than maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. Back then, maybe it was because of social media now and being able to be seen by anyone at any time. It's definitely worse, I believe, for taking it just for that purpose of looking better.
Yeah, quite right. Interesting phrase you used there. For holidays, exactly, to look good on the beach. No question about that. And I think they do it unwittingly, they do it blindly, unaware of the consequences, just so long as they look good. But of course, there are all those problems that present themselves later on, which they no doubt discover.
Yeah. And I mean, I know someone that was relatively the same age as me, was very into bodybuilding while they were in school. And they went to a doctor, and this doctor prescribed them HGH. This doctor and this was at school level. This person was prescribed these, enhancements to help their physique, help them build muscle at a schoolboy level.
That's insane on two levels. The fact that you can get it from your doctor who's prescribing it, but also legally, the only way you can take steroids is if they are prescribed. So I think that's a double whammy by the doctor. But there was some extreme cases where mothers were injecting their sons. That also goes on. And for years, there were rumors about a doctor in Pretoria, and sportsmen would rock up and all these guys would be in the waiting room, and you recognize these sportsmen. So no doubt that many drugs do emanate from doctors.
I think, speak about doctors and prescribing, I think in terms of professional sport now, I would say 99% of professional sportsmen get them from a doctor. Maybe not all of them, but I believe, and what I've witnessed and what I've seen is, and it wouldn't surprise me if, especially just looking at, the whole fiasco with Russia, where the team doctor, like these are accusations, so people can't take my word for it, but I wouldn't be surprised if team doctors are prescribing these things, and team doctors are helping these people, and it's not, South Africans are probably so far behind in what is being prescribed compared to overseas.
Yes, you make such a good point. And I don't know if it's just serendipitous or just ironic, but the Russian government today congratulated the Olympic team and their doctors, which I found astounding. And it goes to exactly what you say. And I think of the local sportsmen who do juice, I don't doubt, because tests are quite rigorous. You can't be taking chances. Some naively do get from their mate at the gym, and this is typically the younger guys, but certainly the athletes at the elite level, they are primarily getting it from doctors.
Yeah. And, we saw with that, I don't know if you watched the documentary about the whole Russian, that cyclist documentary. Icarus, yes.
Outstanding.
So, yeah, that Icarus documentary, the ways that these Russian doctors and the KGB got around all of these tests and were able to, get negatives is incredible. Obviously, we could never do that kind of choreograph in South Africa, but there are still so many ways. I mean, even in the documentary, Wader said, we cannot categorically confirm that, this negative is actually a negative because there's so many ways to get around it.
Well, I think the great dilemma is that when it's state-sponsored, as has been the case in Russia, as previously in East Germany, how do you fight that? I mean, we remember what happened in Sochi, where they were burrowing in where the samples were held and literally cutting a hole in the wall and changing the samples. And, I mean, it was extreme stuff, very difficult to police.
And especially in South Africa, I think because it's so expensive to, run these properly controlled tests, I think half the time they don't even actually happen. I know personally, I'm not going to say if it was my school or another school, whatever, they said they took urine samples and they claimed to have been doing tests on it. But then I heard from someone within the institute of the school saying, our tests are expired, regardless of the result. We can't do anything about it because they're expired.
Yeah, quite right. I mean, SAIDs, who do a very good job under quite tough circumstances in testing and rolling out programs to schools, etc., their budget is tiny. It's like 14 million annually, not all of which goes for drug taking. So it falls largely on the schools to carry out. Some schools actually do their own. They pay up at enormous cost. And you know how budgets are at schools. They're typically quite tight. So schools are reluctant to do testing, which means, of course, many you can assume are falling through the cracks, unquestionably, just because it is such a costly exercise.
And, being someone that's come of age, theoretically, in the bodyboarding industry, I know what someone looks like who's on steroids. And that's what's nice to see these, well, not nice, but it's a good indication looking at these athletes, these professional athletes. And, without a question of doubt, you can see who is on and who isn't. And if you do your research, and there's actually very informative YouTube pages or YouTube channels on YouTube where these YouTubers dissect a person's body and they dissect these actors and they dissect all these people and they show, okay, his traps are slightly more rounded. That clearly shows that he's got more testosterone in his body because that is a big indication of it. His this and that is enlarged, whatever, and then they dissect that. And, as someone in the industry knows people that takes juice, knows people that have, been abusing it their entire lives, it is interesting for me to be able to say, okay, well, I can tell that rugby player, whatever, is on.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Just after the book came out, I had a comrade called Medalist make contact, and she said, it's so disappointing. We know who the dirty athletes are. Because if you're an athlete, you recognize somebody who's running naturally because you've been doing it for 20 years, and you recognize somebody where something's up, something's a bit wobbly. And as you say in bodybuilding, that's absolutely true. I see them in the gym often. And equally in rugby, guys, when you're in a change room or something like that, what's a natural look and what's an unnatural look. And also, when you see a growth spurt in a player, that's not necessarily from meat and vegetables.
Yeah. Yeah, when they played Craven Week in Matric, they looked one way. Then they come to the Bulls Academy, for example, and they put on 15 kilograms.
Yeah, in double quick time.
Yeah. So also, going away from enhancements, there's also sedatives. I wouldn't call weed a sedative, but essentially it kind of is, And, in the book you speak about soccer players maybe smoking that. And what was interesting for me, it was seeing that some of these soccer players would do it right before a game. Or even, I don't know, halftime, whatever, in the change room, go and do it. And then realize, at the end of the game, so much time has passed, the game's over. Fortunately, obviously, with laws changing, I mean, I don't know about South African law, you'll be able to tell me, but I know overseas, NFL, NBA, you no longer will get banned if you had test positive for weed. Well, they won't even test anymore. I don't know how that is in South Africa.
Yeah, weed's a very good example. In fact, what is happening, which the local officials conceded, is that the rules and regulations around weed are softening. So, sometimes, for instance, if you tested it on Monday, it would be out your system, but later in the week, they don't necessarily want to ban you. And it is increasingly seen as a recreational drug. So it remains banned, make no mistake about that. But they aren't chasing after guys who are smoking weed, particularly as it doesn't necessarily enhance performance. It affects performance, which is why it's on the ban list, but it doesn't enhance it. No way at all. You can just imagine trying to compete at the top level, having smoked weed, which several soccer players have done. Yeah. And other sports as well. We've had cases of cricketers at a party, they get offered a bit of weed and then they get unlucky enough to be tested a day or two before. There's not necessarily any malice there, but they are positive and it's a banned substance.
What did you find in, obviously compiling all the data and going through all the research most interesting about, the steroid use? Was it maybe in schools? Was it in sport? Was it maybe even the laws imposed or at least the hiatus an athlete would have to take from being able to play? Some people might have to take 8 months. Other people have had to take 4 years.
Well, I tell you what I found most interesting. Firstly, not surprising, but interesting, was the absolute naivety of most of the athletes. They thought, they're going to jukes the system, they're going to get through, they're not going to get tested. Somehow they'd be able to duck and dive. Almost universally, that's what they thought. And equally linked to that is they could look back on it and say, geez, I was stupid, I wish I hadn't done that, this kind of thing. And then the other thing, which again didn't surprise me, but I found it certainly happens overseas and happens here, are the very creative excuses.
Yeah,
and the lies that
and
get told.
there were a lot of those in your book.
Tons.
And reading it, I'm like, how does this athlete think that someone will believe this?
Yeah, well, I suppose they have to come up with a creative excuse because you can't admit they're accused. Yeah, you can't. Many can't admit it. Many don't want to admit it. It becomes very difficult. So they have to create some kind of lie, no matter how implausible. And some of them are incredibly creative, but hardly any of them come up with anything completely new that we haven't heard before.
At the beginning of the book, you speak about a young lady who was 14 years old, the youngest person ever to be tested positive in the entire world, and she was actually a local lady, South African. Then you got in contact with her. Do you want to explain that story a little bit? Yeah,
her name is Lisa de Villiers. So in the early 90s, Lisa was emerging as this young sprint talent from the East Rand, pigtails, pretty little thing. 14 years old, and then she was tested, and it transpired that there had been some suspicions around her. She was seen to have a very pushy father, pushy coach, those kind of things. Anyway, in 1995, news broke that she had tested positive for steroids, the youngest athlete on earth at the time. It was front page of the New York Times, front page of the Sunday Times, which named her. Ironically, the story was broken by a mate of mine, a guy called Martin Gillingham, who had competed at the 1984 Olympics. He was a 400-meter hurdler. So it exploded all over the place. And much went on. There was all sorts that went on. And interestingly, at the time, she was named, despite being a minor. I'm not sure that would happen now, but she was named and shamed. And she went through this awful time. And then ultimately, she was banned. The authorities banned her, and her ban took effect the day before the Rugby World Cup final in 1995, which she in fact attended. So you can just imagine her emotions at the time must have been in such turmoil. I never forgot that story. And then about 12 years ago, I started putting feelers out. I thought I'd love to chat to Lisa, find out what her story is, what became of her. It was such an interesting time. In South Africa, and for 12 years I knocked on doors, I reached out on social media, I contacted friends of friends who might know her, and ironically I had lived for a while in the area where I assumed she was, and then finally last year I got a contact for her. I WhatsApped her. I was thrilled because she responded, and I really couldn't believe it, and better still, I said to her, can we meet? And she said, I'm ready to tell my story, which was amazing. So we met up for the first time. We had coffee, and then ultimately we met a few more times. She's 41 years old now. She's got a daughter. She's lived her whole life. Her daughter's very athletic, and the one thing Lisa brings to the story is perspective. Unfortunately, her dad has since died. Her coach is now quite old and quite cynical about what went on. He knows he's been in the crosshairs. So to revisit the Lisa de Villiers story is remarkable, and to hear her take on it. It's a very tangled story and ultimately quite a sad story. You know, somebody who had this great dream and her dream was crushed.
And it's sad because, you know, at 14, she's just someone, her dad, coach, whoever it was, he has a pill, take this 3 times, 5 times a week, whatever it is. And I mean, it's the same as you see a fat toddler. It's the parent's fault, or it's the person looking after the caretaker, whatever's fault, that a baby or a toddler is very fat. You know, it's bad parenting, or it's bad coaching, or it's whatever it may be. You know, it's not her fault. She's 14 years old. I mean, who makes correct decisions at 14?
Exactly. It's no minus fault. And you look at Valieva at the Winter Olympics, who's been pinked. She's 15 years old. And whatever you say about her, she's not the one who's making the decision to take something. You know, it's those people around her, as you speak, you know, the coaches, the managers, the people who are closest to her.
So, obviously, she would have been in a school level. Have you, you know, in terms of schooling, seen a change, obviously, through your research from maybe when you started 15 years ago, whenever it may be? Have you seen more usage in school? Have you seen less? Have you just seen... What have you seen in terms of, you know, the usage?
It's a good question. And in fact, the usage is paralleled with the SAID's findings, you know, so you can't make any assumptions. You've got to go along with official statistics and things like that. And certainly it's shown in the last 10 years, it's been very prevalent, no question. But that's not to say it wasn't prevalent before. You know, SAID's...
It's not researched as much maybe, or documented.
But kind of anecdotally, you know, I've spoken to lots of old boys who speak about their experiences at the schools, going back 20 years at least, you know, with these enormous rugby teams and boys, which was unnatural. So, like I say, it's anecdotal, but equally, I think it flared up probably about 5 years ago, but SAIDS and SA Rugby particularly have tightened the screws really hard. And now you're taking quite a risk, because there's a good chance you're going to get found out. I don't doubt that. I think it's quite risky, but also a lot of these boys do it. They feel it's risk versus reward. You potentially can get a junior contract at one of the unions, so you know they need to put on 10 kilos. That's a guaranteed way of doing it.
And it's a sad, you know, domino effect where if I don't do it, there's going to be someone else that is doing it, and they're going to get the position before me, and it's kind of, do I do this and risk getting caught, or do I not do it and not make the team? And it's sad because it's so prevalent, and because there's just so much access to it. Everybody, or not everybody, but you know, not even the majority. There's going to be a few people, a select few, that are going to do it because they know there's another select few doing it. And there's that guy in school's doing it. Now, I'm not going to make Craven weak, because we equally as talented, we equally as everything. If I don't take this little bit of help, he's going to take the little bit of help, and he's going to make it. I'm going to disappoint family, disappoint parents, or whatever it may be. All my dreams aren't going to be realized because, you know, that guy's going to do it. Or at least the belief that guy's going to do it.
Yeah, all true. And I think what compounds it is this South African rugby's DNA, where this is huge emphasis on size, on strength and power. And unless you're very, very talented, like Cheslin Colby, who's small, nippy, lethal, a terrific rugby player, but then there's not room for a lot of those guys in a rugby team. So the bigger and stronger you can get, the more chance you've got. And very few guys have the natural ability to pack on the kilos as they must.
And, you know, I love looking at rugby players train and watching how, you know, dedicated they are. And, you know, it is the elite few that can make it in rugby. Regardless of anything that they give them help, whatever. It is still the elite few, because I know personally, playing rugby at school level, then, you know, playing rugby at Lions, I saw this massive gap, this leap that even I, who was like, okay, I wouldn't say I was the best in my school, whatever, but that was one of only 2 people that made the Lions side from my school, even from what I was capable of to what I saw these average players in Lions, you know, not the people that were excelling in Lions, but the people that were kind of there, kind of as good as me, but still slightly better. It was still a big gap, you know, and that's what is so nice about playing Lions is, you know, you just did your job. You wouldn't have to compensate for someone else not doing their job. everyone is so talented. In a world where there's so many people, so much talent, you still need to be exceptionally talented to do it. And I used to be in Pretoria. I'd watch Jesse Creel. I would see him in the morning at gym. Then I would see on Instagram, okay, now he's doing whatever training with the Bulls. Afternoon, I would see him at gym. In the evening, I would see he's doing some other training with the Bulls. And to keep up with that, you need to be a phenomenal specimen. You need to be this amazing human. That's why there's so many other people that can't keep up and do need to do that, because they need the recovery. They need the certain help because they're not as physically inclined to be able to keep up.
Yeah, Jesse, you make some really good points there. I mean, I've been around elite rugby and provincial and Springboks for about 30 years, and I still marvel at how big they are. And often you have visiting teams who have some monsters themselves, and they can't believe, man for man, the size of South Africa's players. And like you, I admire the work ethic of our players. And if you just... For me, there's no player who becomes a Springbok who isn't special, and it's just absolutely remarkable, because you can imagine, realistically, you probably have 300 elite level players in a single position vying to be, the loose head or the tight head or the fly half or whatever the case is, in the professional system, all trying their hardest. And you need to do, the margins are so tiny, the inches they talk of, and you need to do that little bit extra, like a Jesse Creel, who's a demon in the gym. And certainly that work ethic is remarkable, but also you aren't going to make it if you don't have it. That's part of it. So I found that with a lot of the steroids, people make this assumption that people might take juice and, you sit on your couch. It doesn't work like that. It's got to go hand in hand with the coach, with the training.
Yeah. And that's also something, obviously, being in the bodyboarding industry and seeing, people say, oh no, he's just on steroids. That's why he looks like that. Yes, that's why he's that size, but compounded with what he eats every single day and never drinks alcohol and never smokes and never does all of these things, and how hard he trains and how much he prioritizes sleep and how much he prioritizes everything to allow him to look that way. Obviously, yes, the juice is 100% allowing him that extra bit of muscle, but there's no way that because let's say a professional bodybuilder, there's no way they're a professional bodybuilder just because of steroids. That's also not that, those Russian Olympic athletes that won gold who were, tested positive. They didn't win gold just because of the steroids. They still also, because of their training, because of their diet, because of their discipline.
Let me ask you something, Jesse, because what I discovered with bodybuilding in particular, or guys in gym who juice, is some of them rationalized it by saying, but I'm not competing. Who am I cheating if I'm bulking up with juice and, I want to look good and things like that? Is that a correct way to rationalize it? Are they cheating? Do fellow bodybuilders look at them as cheats? Or if you look at the SAID's findings, the majority are weightlifters come bodybuilders, that kind of thing. How's it viewed in that environment?
Well, in terms of competing, people will look at someone that doesn't take steroids and be like, you stupid not to.
Right.
Every single person that is competitive and does well is on steroids. If you're not, unfortunately, you're not going to do well. It's one of those things. But as nobody ever in bodyboarding looks at another person that's doing well in bodyboarding on stage and thinks, he doesn't deserve that, he's on juice.
Right.
It's something that, some people, everybody knows. And it's not frowned upon in the bodyboarding industry. It's almost, let's say it's more the opposite, where if someone's not on steroids and they still look amazing, people will be like, yo, well done.
Okay.
But it's not, that guy won the show, but he's on juice. That's not fair, because the 11 other people that came placed after him are also on juice. So it's not like he's got to have, obviously, everyone takes different amounts, but, that's between them and whatever they do behind closed doors. There's no one that will be like, oh no, he shouldn't have won. He takes, I don't know, slightly more than the guy came second. It's kind of, you take what you want to take because everyone's doing it.
Okay, so people are far less judgmental.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah,
because even if you look at anything that requires something to, it's like essentially, no, I can't commend Jesse Creel for being so fit because he's running. The same. It's like Jesse Creel needs to run to be able to play good rugby. Mm-hmm. A bodyboarder needs to take juice to be a successful bodyboarder.
Right.
So do you have any plans? Because obviously you, for 15 years, were researching this book, or researching stuff not with the intention of putting together a book. I mean, you're reaching out to all these people so many years ago just because you obviously love storytelling and love finding information. Is there something now that you currently have seen that you'd maybe put together for a book or something along those lines?
It's a good question. And I've got a kind of loose idea, but essentially very, very different to this. This book obviously focuses on the negative, and my idea is to focus on the positive about the things that inspire our sportsmen, their habits, their daily habits, their rituals, their beliefs, their heroes, and just talk about those common themes as well. Because for a country our size, we produce a remarkable number of world-class sportsmen, and who often punch above their weight and who often succeed despite pressures with cash, despite pressures with the administration, all those things. And so my view is that we also have great sportsmen we can celebrate. So I'm trying to find the right thing to reflect that kind of celebration.
Have you got any backlash from this book?
Early days. I think I'm waiting for people to read it. Certainly the initial feedback has been...
So it's only been out for 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, but the initial feedback has been quite positive. But I think people are giving that feedback based on the idea and what they've heard about the book. I probably will get some blowback, which is fine, because of course anybody who's been caught in the crosshairs, it's an awkward, uncomfortable thing, particularly if it's been documented as this has.
And so, which main bookstores, or is it on Takealot? Where can people grab your book?
Yeah, great question. It is on Takealot. It's available. Exclusives, Wordsworth, graffiti books, Loot, Reader's Warehouse. So, pretty much anywhere where you can buy books, I'm happy to say.
How just out of interest sake, how do you go about, Penguin obviously published it, but how do you go about reaching out to them? Do you have to send them the final copy and, they're like, okay, well, that's a book good enough for us to publish, or how does it work?
It's a good question. Fortunately, I had a kind of prior relationship with them, which is quite cool. But I reached out to them with the idea, and what they do is they ask you to flesh it out. They want to hear some more. So I sent them through a couple of early provisional chapters, so stuff that I could put to bed early, let them have it. But equally, I reached out to other publishers as well. So you've got to hedge your bets and hope that one of the nibbles. And fortunately, Penguin were great from the start. Very encouraging, dealing with real slick professionals, because although you put the manuscript together, you need good editors, which they had proofreaders who were forensic. They were so thorough. And of course, they bring legal eyes to it as well, because there's a legal dimension to a book like this. So it went through all of that as well. It's quite a process.
And in terms of the negotiations, because I think this was 277 Rand, do they say, okay, this is what it's going to cost you, Clinton, to get one book printed? Whatever you charge at these bookstores is up to you, or do they say, this is the recommended selling price, this is what we're going to, tell the bookstores to sell it as?
Yeah, it's interesting because now you say 277. I've heard it. Like Takealot, you can get it for 230.
Okay.
Which is interesting.
So it's probably just exclusive that obviously marked this up.
Presumably. I don't know. Essentially, there's a percentage that accrues to me at the end of the day, but I don't know how many have been printed or anything like that. That is the publisher works it out with the booksellers. They've got people probably far smarter than me auditing it and sorting out the financials.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on. If you guys are interested in getting this book, you heard where to get it.